We call for the swearing and apologies, please, Lynn.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Members, if you hear your name, could you confirm your attendance, please? Councillor Jones?
Present.
Councillor Watts?
Present.
Councillor Richardson?
Present.
Councillor Canning?
Present, thanks.
Councillor Mabin?
Yeah, present, thank you.
Councillor Clark?
Present.
Councillor Cogley?
Here.
Councillor Lennox?
Morning here.
Councillor Kyle?
Present.
Councillor Hogg?
Yep, good morning, I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart?
Yep, I'm here, Lynn, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I'm also here, Councillor McFadden.
Thanks, Councillor McFadden. Noted.
Okay, thank you very much. And just before we head into item 1 on our papers, and just in response to a public comment which was sent to me by a member of the public regarding this meeting, I would just hand over to our monitoring officer just for guidance on that. Please, thanks, David.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. I think just to set the context for this, because I'm conscious we don't have too many call-ins, but it is important that this committee is comfortable in dealing with the one we have in front of us at this time. The first point I would make is that in a cabinet model of local government, then scrutiny is a function of, in this case, our governance and scrutiny committee. It's in the title. Can't say it, but it's in the title. It sits therefore with all members of the governance and scrutiny committee to apply effective scrutiny to the decisions of cabinet. The point being, in the old committee model, there's more of an understanding that one group may form an administration and they may make certain decisions, and that the opposition form the scrutiny. That doesn't work in a cabinet model because, as I said, the scrutiny function sits with all of the members equally on the shoulders of all of the members of this committee. In that regard, the decision that was taken by Cabinet is an administrative one, and I promise I'm not going to stray into any of the merits. This is just to set the context for what needs to be thought through today, and the position that needs to be, a decision that needs to be taken today. And apologies to those that have heard this before, but I think it's important to give the legal context in terms of what we mean by that as an administrative decision, because as council, as a public body, when making those kinds of decisions, still doesn't have a free hand. And I've used the example before of the case down in Blackpool, where a solicitor rented a unit in a shopping centre from the local county council and was a good tenant for 5 years and paid a rent and complied with all other terms and conditions of the lease, and then applied in good faith towards the end of the 5 years for renewal of that lease from the county council, and the county council said no. So she asked, and I think initially didn't get told very much, and then eventually she judicially reviewed them because they couldn't give her a good reason. And it turned out the reason was that solicitor's primary business was taking on public liability claims for those who may have slipped and tripped in the floor or the environs of the shopping mall or anywhere else in Blackpool County. So essentially the council's thinking was, we don't want to accommodate you in our shopping mall because for a living you sue us on behalf of your clients. And she won the judicial review because that wasn't a good reason. And I'm just using that as an example. It wasn't the sufficient reason, because administrative decisions, while they can be distinguished from quasi-judicial decisions, and members are all familiar with, I'm sure, with the terms of Section 7 of the Code, which deal with licensing and planning, quasi-judicial matters, and are much stricter rules on what members should and shouldn't do in advance of taking quasi-judicial decisions, be it planning or licensing. However, as I say, even as an administrative decision, members don't have a free hand. Yeah, we'll give that lease, we won't give that lease, whatever. It's still governed by what they call the Wednesbury Principles, which are the basic principles of common law that permeate through all the jurisprudence on public law cases where organisations, public sector organisations, have taken decisions that have then been challenged for lack of sufficient or good reasoning. The Wednesbury Principles that therefore set just the context to the Cabinet decision and discussions here today are that anything that the Council decides to do should obviously be lawful, It needs to be lawful within the external rules, the law of the land. It needs to be intra vires, which means it needs to be within the powers of the council to do it. And obviously the council has a lot of powers, but it's also the delegation of that. If Cabinet takes a decision, should it have been council? Should it have been officers? Could it be officers? So that's what intra vires means. Lawful and within our powers are the first two. They need to be reasonable. They need to be rational. They need to be clear and unambiguous, and they need to be consistently applied. That might be more than 7, so I'll stop there. But basically, as I say, even when the council, any council is taking those kind of decisions, including whether or not to grant a lease of council-owned property to any organisation, then it isn't a free hand. It's within the parameters of the Wednesbury principles, because even those administrative decisions are subject to legal challenge in the form of judicial review, and that's why I refer you to the Blackpool case to set that context. Within that, what I would say is you have a process clearly set out in front of you at page 3 of the papers today, and it doesn't add any value for me to sit and read that out. You're all very familiar with that in terms of the order of things. And all I would stress is that the function of the committee here is to hear what those calling in this Cabinet decision have to say about that, and then what those who were party to the taking of the decision and the presentation of the report to Cabinet have to say in response. It's then for this committee to consider everything you've heard, to look at everything that's before you, and then to come to your view individually and collectively on whether or not the decision taken by Cabinet should be revisited. And all I would say at this stage, going back to the Wednesbury principles, is that for anyone, if an officer puts a paper in front of a committee and the committee says we don't like that, it's generally should be recognised as being incumbent in that committee or a sheriff on appeal to say what was wrong with the decision. If you're going to send something back to be looked at again, then you should give the folk a steer as to which elements of what was put up that wasn't acceptable need to be revisited. So reasons, I think, are going to be important today for the call-in, for the decision and the recommendation, and ultimately, most importantly, this committee, as per the options at the end of the process, will either need to make a decision that there was something wrong with the Cabinet decision and refer it back to Cabinet and ask Cabinet to look at that decision again in specific reference to whatever points the committee today feels weren't addressed appropriately or sufficiently or at all, if that's the case. Equally, the committee today may decide that it hasn't been made out, and then it would be referred back to Cabinet simply to confirm that the committee here doesn't wish Cabinet or require Cabinet to look at it again. And the options available to Cabinet are set out at the end. So the final thing, Chair, and it's a long way round to address the point you made, is I would simply give the best advice as always to all members of the committee that as a member of the Governance and Scrutiny Committee, your primary responsibility is to provide that effective scrutiny, which I would respectfully suggest means that you each need to come in here with an open mind, a clear conscience, and leave any other considerations or political or party allegiances or personal allegiances at the door. The requirement still under the code, even though it's not quasi-judicial, is to determine this in its merits, and your responsibility first and foremost is as a member of the Governance and Scrutiny Committee rather than a member of any other group, party or organisation. So the final point I would say is if any member did feel that they may already have had sufficient understanding of this decision, that they could have formed a view before today, I would also ask you to leave any preconceived view that whether it has or hasn't already been expressed in social media, the curse, to leave any preconceived notions at the door as well, and to determine this based on what is put in front of you today and what you hear from all parties, and to make a decision on the merits at the conclusion of the process. I hope that addresses the concern. If it does, Chair, just a couple of housekeeping points. One member had asked for certain further information yesterday afternoon. I've clarified with those presenting from the housing service from Katie and Blair that all bar the application form is actually available through the CAT website link in the report. So there is further background information that was on the CAT website before Cabinet and again today. Sorry, I think that was the only process point. But it would obviously be for the committee if you feel there's further information. I think the one point is, sorry, the application form isn't necessarily on the CAT website. It's not the normal practice. But if this committee wants sight of any paperwork at any time, then that would be a decision for the committee to take. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, members.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, does everybody understand what David has just said? We're happy to proceed. Okay. Then we'll head straight in. So first of all, are there any declarations of interest? No, no, okay. So item 2 is the consideration of the called in decision of Cabinet, the consultation response of community asset transfer of the Old People's Cabin within the Howard Park. So we have all call-in signatories present and seated appropriately as we do officers and spokespersons. So we'll move on to stage 2 and we'll invite the signatories to then speak to their call-in notice. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I think just as a start, the point that I want to make and just underline what has already been said this morning is that this process is absolutely routine. There is nothing at all strange about it. The majority of decisions taken by Cabinet, unless they are excluded by Cabinet within the papers, are available to be called in. And no decisions, therefore, that Cabinet takes can be implemented until after the expiry of the call-in period, which is in actual fact the second Thursday because Council meets on a Wednesday. So that's really all that has happened here. Now, I know when I look and I see that there have been various comments that have been made across media before we reached the point that we had got to the second Thursday. That is something that we just have to accept. That's something that as we go through, I think it is worth highlighting. What we're doing here is nothing unusual at all. What in calling in is a requirement is to specify the reasons for that decision being called in. And there are really two parts to that. Part 1 is the presented report and process applied as described failed to address the concerns expressed by the local community against this asset transfer. And what I would hope to be able to do is present to you some more background behind that. Part 2 is introducing unnecessary jeopardy to the success of the project and its harmonious integration into the local community. So in summary, there are two sets here. One, there is an organisation who quite legitimately asks to have an asset transferred to them. They represent change and the community who do not want change. Not an unusual set of circumstances, something that those of us who are involved and have been for years involved in planning are completely familiar with. It is about how do we actually manage that. So the report was presented to us. That's a report which is the Community Asset Transfer Howard Park report dated the 18th of January. And that came along to Cabinet on that date. I think you've all got copies of that within your papers. Having given consideration to that, I moved that although I was supportive of the aims of the project, not to approve the lease of the Old People's Cabin, Howard Park, to Kilmarnock Railway Heritage Trust on the basis that this was not considered to be an appropriate location. On that day at Cabinet, there were 11 members of Cabinet, all present. A further amendment to that motion was raised. There was a vote taken. 11 people eligible to vote. The motion carried 4 votes and the amendment was successful, carrying 7 votes. That means that on that day that there were 4 out of 11 people at Cabinet who were in agreement that they were supportive of the aims of the project, but they could not approve the lease because it was not considered to be an appropriate location. Now, I'm quite sure that you're asking yourselves, how could that conclusion have been reached? And some of that is there when we look at what is the background, what is the process that we actually have to complete a community asset transfer. Community asset transfer framework, we are now on to the second version of that because again, the process of transferring assets is not an unusual thing within this council. It is set within the transfer framework itself in terms of the council's commitment to transferring that, and it's also set against the national policy context. There are various aspects of that. Basically, if I can summarise that to you, it's a bit like planning again. There is a presumption that if somebody submits a planning application, it is more likely that that planning application will be granted than not granted. Similarly, when a community asset transfer is asked for, the response, the expectation is that it will be more likely to be granted than not granted. That's the responsibility of the Community Empowerment Scotland Act of 2015, and this council has rightly embraced that approach. So, community asset is a clear process. It is set out explaining how to apply, and it's also set out explaining what an applicant can actually expect to happen. It very clearly in that framework states that the council will look for evidence of community support for that transfer. And it explains this, how this has to be obtained through consulting existing users, other community groups, and stakeholders from within the community. It outlines and sets out correctly who is eligible to apply, and then sets out the timescales and stages of the process itself. Now, there are actually 5 stages to community asset transfer. The first 2, and it's clear that those are 2 things that could interchange. One is about looking at the suitability of the assets. The second one is about looking at expressions of interest from people who are looking to take over that asset. Stage 3 then requires detailed submissions. Stage 4 is the consideration of the application itself. And stage 5 is when that application is actually presented to Cabinet for Cabinet to take a decision. And then we have, if Cabinet decides to take that decision in a positive manner to transfer that asset, then we have the implementation and transfer. There are also indicative timescales, as you would expect, set out. That's because, again, this is a process which can take a considerable length of time to assemble all of the information. And it's really important that everybody is clear that there is an end point to this. So stage one, which is really seen as an internal process undertaken by a multidisciplinary officer working group, it's the CAT group, takes place. Then we go on to stage two. If the CAT process is agreed and that asset is offered up for consideration of transfer, then the community group would have 6 weeks to make that application. So what they would do is a very simple form, and what they would then do is they would make an expression of interest and provide a summary of the proposal, identifying local support. So at that stage, if they are looking for some local report, it would be completely appropriate for there to be some initial consultation done at that point. But remember, that's only consultation that gets us to stage two. Okay. My understanding is that the trust undertook some, I think we have documentation there, which explains to us that the trust sought to present some material to round about 200 properties in the immediate area. If you could just give me a second, I'll just define for you what area that actually was. I understand that covered the following streets of Dundonald Road, McClellan Drive, Wallace Street and Howard Park Drive. And my understanding is that that took place, which was appropriate at that stage. So round about a very clear and direct area immediately geographically touching across the park. Once that has been submitted, the officer working group then has 4 weeks to determine the strength of the proposals and the suitability of the community group against preset criteria. So that's a total of 10 weeks to complete stage two. If that's okay, then the community group are invited to move to stage three, where they have to submit a detailed business plan, and they have 3 months to submit that application. Now, it is accepted that these are voluntary community groups who are making these applications, so it's completely appropriate that you would expect that they have support, and Vibrant Communities team are established to provide them with support through that process for any applicant. Once that is actually completed, the CAT group have 6 weeks to assess the application against the assessment criteria and prepare a report and submit it to Cabinet. So when we actually add that up, and the report, once it has been submitted to the CAT team, has 4 weeks to get to Cabinet after they have taken a decision on. So effectively that process is designed to take something in the region of round about 32 to 34 weeks, I think, when we add that up. These are not my figures. These are figures that I have lifted from the CAT website. And the Cabinet paper describes that written representations were encouraged from a period which was the 6th of September to the 7th of November 21, and that a consultation, this is the formal consultation, not the consultation undertaken on their own at the start of the process, because we are now at stage 3 of the process, that a consultation meeting took place on the 21st of April. That's 23 weeks later. Remember, we would have expected the entirety of the process to have taken between 32 to 34 weeks. So a public meeting took place after that. Actually, then that was 39 weeks later, 39 weeks after the first consultation. 6th of September to the 7th of November 21, 39 weeks later on the 18th of January. So a process that's expected to take 32 to 34 weeks to get to Cabinet actually took over 62 weeks to get to Cabinet. Now, there is a minute on the CAT website of the public meeting that took place, and in it, one of the aspects as part of this process, it is acknowledged that there had been, I think, 239 objections. Again, you have that reference to in your paper that was submitted to Cabinet, and also another couple of objections, which takes you up to the number that is in your Cabinet paper of 241. Invitations were expected to be sent out to that public meeting to everybody who had actually registered an objection. In actual fact, there were 102 invitations sent out. That's indicating that there were 57 objectors who were missed. Now, that was acknowledged at the public meeting, that there had been some concerns about objectors making objection but not actually being invited to the meeting along. It was investigated. The officer who is with us today had rightly said that if he had made a mistake, he would investigate it. He did, and went further than that, because people are only human after all, had said that he would then admit to any mistake if one was to be found, and actually put himself forward for any disciplinary action. And that is there, and that is acknowledged. Again, what I am expressing to you is accepting that human error is possible. So the officer self-referred to a discipline process. There were then complaints submitted about the meeting itself. There were complaints raised at the meeting itself. That was on top of concerns raised, which again is in your paper, indicating that, sorry, just 1 second, please. Indicating that there were issues raised that the facility would be used to treat people with particular conditions, that the facility was already fully funded and that consultation was just a paper exercise, that the decision had already been made on the outcome of the CAT application, and that the buildings renovated within the railway station were mostly vacant. Now, one of the aspects that I would have expected as we went through this process was that any and all issues raised by any objectors within the local community would have been addressed as part of this process. Certainly concerns that this was just a paper exercise and that some decision had actually been made. Unfortunately, I cannot see any evidence of that having taken place. Clearly, there have been a paper in front of us. Language for me is always everything. At point 13 of the paper that was presented, paragraph 13 of the paper that was presented to Cabinet, it states very clearly, the second circulation from Friends of Howard Park, however, was the start of the misinformation, which has dominated the community asset transfer. Now, to categorise something as concerns, as misinformation, I think is not an objective use of language. I think that's a regret. Again, point 14, 3 further circulations, one from Friends of Howard Park and one from an organisation, again, claiming to be the Howard Park Neighbourhood Watch. Again, language, I think that that's not objective language. I think that that's subjective against a backdrop, members, where the community have already expressed their concerns, because this is about a change process, that this was just a paper exercise and that a decision had already been taken. I consider that following the process that is set out here has at its absolute heart, in terms of working with our local communities, which after all is what we expect officers to be able to do and to do effectively, has to then listen, hear loudly what the concerns are that are raised and respond to those. That's what we are used to actually expecting. Unfortunately, my conclusion is that this unfortunately has been failed. So we have had people who have gone forward to raise concerns, and with regret, those concerns have not been addressed. They are not addressed within the paper that has been presented to Cabinet for Cabinet to determine. I know that there are questions raised in terms of why is this not an appropriate location? I would seek to answer that. Is there something peculiar about the park? Is there something particular about this building? No. No. Unfortunately, failure to apply this process, not only in its stage by stage following of the process, but also the spirit of the process, and hearing the concerns raised by people in the community raising concerns and adequately addressing those concerns, has in actual fact turned a location into a location which is not appropriate. Not appropriate because for an asset transfer to work, it has to bed into that community. It has to be accepted by that community. It has to become a functioning part of that community. Hence, the reason for refusal at Cabinet. Hence, the second part of the call-in, introducing unnecessary jeopardy to the success of the project and its harmonious integration into the local community. I very much want to hope that the Trust is successful in any of its ventures. It certainly would have my support to be successful in any of its ventures. Regretfully, because of the manner that this has been handled, I am not convinced that this location is an appropriate location.
Are you finished, Councillor Mackay? Are there any other signatories of the call and wishing to speak? Okay, Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Following on, I would like to highlight that I believe there has been a failure to address the concerns of the local community, and as a result has placed the project in undue jeopardy and its harmonious integration within the community. I was a new councillor when this came to me, so I sought guidance from the council leader. The council leader responded with that the process, the way it had been conducted, left a lot to be desired. Now, that was a council leader in many respects. If that's coming from his mouth, that's enough for me. However, I did need to look into it more. I was appointed on the 5th of May. The papers came to me on the 16th of January with no knowledge about this at all. So when we speak about consultation, when we speak about collaboration and taking people with us, I was unaware of the project until that the documents came to my house. It gave me 2 days to prepare on something I had no knowledge about whatsoever. So I had no way of addressing the concerns of the local community, and I felt the way it had been handled and coming to me very late in the day had placed the project in unnecessary jeopardy. I raised it immediately with the leader of my group, who took it further up, and again there was a admission of guilt that this could have been handled better. However, that water was under the bridge, and I had 2 days to come up with a support or lack thereof to push the motion through. Myself and indeed the Conservative group are fully supportive of projects of that nature, and I need to make that clear. Some of the stuff that's been in social media and indeed in the newspaper at best is mischief making, and at worst it's deceitful, misleading people. All political groups within Cabinet were represented in highlighting the fact they did not wish this to go ahead. This was not the Conservatives and just Labour. All political groups highlighted their concerns. The timescales, it should take 32 to 34 weeks. It took 62 weeks. Public consultation. The first meeting took place, and then there was a gap of 39 weeks to the first consultation. Invitations for the public meetings should have been sent out to all objectors, yet, as again, my colleague has highlighted, 57 objectors were missing, and that was regrettable, but is a significant flaw in the process. Only 4 streets were canvassed. The documentation we get sent out for Cabinet highlighted community consultation. It highlights the core element of CAT applications is community consultation, yet we've surely shown we haven't done that correctly. It highlights transparency, wider representation, and address the representation in a timely manner. Again, it's been illustrated that we didn't highlight it in a timely manner, and again, that's regrettable, but that's a fact. Point 16 would highlight the East Ayrshire Council and the Railway Heritage Trust worked collaboratively on a community consultation. I failed to see how it can be collaboratively if I knew nothing about it as an elected member. Point 17 highlights how the Railway Heritage Trust worked in partnership with East Ayrshire Council to produce and circulate a response to the representations received. I'm not aware of any partnership that included me. I wasn't invited to any meetings. Again, the last public meeting was before my tenure, but all that does is seek to highlight the length of time it took. The last public meeting, I believe, was on the 21st of April. These papers came, as I say, on the 16th of January. Between then, there had been nothing. So I was unable to represent the people that elected me because I knew nothing of it. And for those reasons, that's why we decided to call the papers in. Thank you.
Are you finished, Councillor Hasmship? Councillor Holland, do you wish to speak? No. Okay. In that case,
Fadgen's online, Chair, but I don't think it.
oh, I beg your pardon. As Councillor McFadden, are you wishing to make any representations this morning?
Only just to reiterate what's been said by Councillor Adams and Councillor Mackay. I think they've put it concisely, and I haven't really anything to add to it, and just I'm of the same opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything else online? Lynn, that would be
no.
part of the call.
No, there's not
Okay,
online.
thank you very much for that. In that case, then we shall move to third stage. So stage 3, and we would invite the cabinet member with responsibility, accompanied by the appropriate officer, to make their representations. Thank you. Is that Councillor Maitland?
Just to you, Chair and members, the scheme of the delegation contains the provisions for call-in that were written and put in place by Council in 2007. They do refer to the portfolio holder in the singular, but clearly at that time there wasn't the same level of in detail in the portfolio holders. The portfolios have changed over time, and when the administration were initially asked in preparation for the call-in as to the relevant portfolio holder they were putting forward, they advised Councillor McMahon as having the mental health portfolio within his overall portfolio, and the point was made that this could be viewed or is clearly a property matter as well, I would submit, and therefore arguably cuts across the two portfolios. You also have Councillor Maitland with the property portfolio, and rather than create two stools for this potentially to fall between in terms of a debate about which is the right portfolio holder, the pragmatic approach that's been taken, subject to agreement by the committee, is that both portfolio holders will appear for the respective interests, with Councillor Maitland dealing with any property matters and Councillor McMahon dealing with the broader mental health aspects as they arise. So, point being, it does say portfolio holder singular. That is the council's own schema deals. It's not necessarily cast in stone. It needs to be pragmatically interpreted in a practical situation. And the decision or the position at the moment is there are two portfolio holders here looking to put forward elements of the case respectively for their own portfolios. And that's the position. I'm hoping that the committee sees the merit, and as I say, not creating the two stools for it to fall between. If you have both portfolio holders, there can be no question that the relevant one is here for anything that any member wants to raise. So it's just to cover that point. The other housekeeping point I meant to raise earlier, sorry I forgot, was, and hopefully it won't be necessary because once was enough, but I should have said at the outset, we have the facility, should there, and I'm glad we're not there, but if there was any questions about what was or wasn't said at Cabinet, we do have the footage of the Cabinet hearing or meeting item available, but hopefully we won't need it because it's important that we focus on the discussion today rather than the discussion a fortnight ago. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay, Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David. However, I do have to reference what happened on the 18th of January. This won't take long. I am confused as to why we are here, and I am struggling to understand the reason for the call-in, the wording of it, and what part of the process has not been followed, despite the attempt that I've heard from my colleagues this morning. All CAT transfers follow the same framework. However, they take different lengths of time to be completed and satisfied. My confusion stems from this. The original concerns regarding the paper on the 18th of January considered the problem of being the wrong place or location, or the wrong people in the location, apart like a railway station or a street being a public space and can be used by anybody. Stigma appeared to be the main reason offered by the opposition, although there was one concern regarding signage. There was no similar concerns regarding the signage to Kilmarnock Tennis Club, even though they have a base in K Park. 88% of the complaints were concerned about safety. The CAT transfer process, as we've heard this morning, has to satisfy conditions and follows the same process that has resulted successfully in East Ayrshire's 60+ CAT transfers, including Centre Stage, Scotland's largest. The paper. The decision to pass the paper at Cabinet was voted on 7-4 and followed a debate on the contents and presentations. Councillors were satisfied that the correct procedures, responses, consultation, the minuting, the publication on our website had all been carried out. No issues were raised in terms of process at Cabinet on the 18th. Being part of the common good land, the CAT itself has to satisfy a more robust procedure and also has to go in front of a sheriff. In the paper, it is stated that they went beyond Scottish Government guidelines and were proactive in the response to the campaigns and misinformation. The charity too went beyond what was required of it. The KRHT faced similar responses when it originally set up in the train station, and none of these fears came to fruition. These concerns have proven to be unfounded. There were 240 contributions from the public, which the process answered, addressing in the main the misinformation of who could be giving or using this service and the cafe. There was no concerns about the people using the bowling green. East Ayrshire Council partners, such as the police, saw the addition of the cafe and reuse of the bowling green, CCTV and lighting as contributing to the overall safety of the park. This is contained within the papers. On the day, the leader proposed additional conditions to the lease and for ongoing monitoring by vibrant communities, which were accepted, and these are minuted on page 5. No other conditions were asked to be added by the opposition councillors, who remained unanimous that this was simply the wrong place. The paper presented satisfied myself and my colleagues that voted for it, that the CAT was good for the community, in the right place, ran by an established charity, and was, most importantly, sustainable. My understanding that has also gone through the internal review auditor, who is also satisfied. The second part I'm asked to look at is terms of the call-in relation to the procedure. Now, I will answer this as best I can, as again, like the shift from stigma and place as the opposition objections to process of this objection as the reason that we are here today, I am struggling with. The concerns of the community have been attempted to address through the correct process, and as agreed in the amendment, we will continue to monitor and monitor the conditions on the day and going ahead into the future. Harmonious, I understand, that's the word used in the objection, in the call-in. Harmonious, I understand, but I do feel how to understand and robustly addressing the concerns of 240 people. They have introduced unnecessary jeopardy to the project itself. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Maitland. So, yeah. Okay, Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. I've been asked today to outline the reasons for the Cabinet decision and respond to the terms of the call-in. And like Councillor Maitland, I'm a bit confused as to why it has been called in. I believe the Cabinet decision to approve the asset transfer was fundamentally based on sound, tried, tested policy and procedures that officers have followed in the previous 63, including the largest in Scotland, the Kilmarnock Academy. In addition to the previous applications, there was a statutory requirement, as Councillor Maitland has referred to, set out in Section 104 of the Community Empowerment Act. To the application itself, it was clear and concise in its aims and objectives to turn the Old Man's Cabin into a social enterprise cafe, increasing the services within the Howard Park area, and to increase employment opportunities to those affected by poor mental well-being, and to establish 2 counselling rooms for those, and I emphasise, with low to moderate mental well-being issues. And my understanding was that the majority of the sessions would have been delivered from students at Ayrshire College, and clearly at this stage early intervention would reduce the risk of longer-term issues. A report called How Parks and Green Spaces Can Improve Your Health states that parks and green spaces provide a variety of health benefits from promoting physical activity, connection to nature and opportunities for community engagement. Current evidence is clear that promoting the role of green space and quality in planning policy decision making across all contexts ultimately lead to a healthier and happier population. The Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust have reported their intention to the space for Qigong and mindfulness. So from the initial 200 letters sent out indicating the aims in the proposal, there was minimum response to those. And it's in the papers, it did generate 5 circulations delivered to the wider population in Kilmarnock West area from friends of the Howard Park urging residents and the concerns toward 3 members to write to the Chief Executive Leader and Deputy Leader. As already been referred to, the second circulation was the start of the misinformation about rehabilitation of prisoners and the 46 objections, followed by another 3 circulations from the Howard Park claiming decision had already been taken, one from a group or individual to be called the Howard Park Neighbourhood Watch, and one from We Are Being Lied To. So during the consultation period, 241 representatives were made, and the details of the correspondence received were set out in the paper presented to Cabinet. I have read all of the correspondence, and if you bear with me, I do intend to read 1 or 2 of the respondents out and highlight some, for me, what would be misinformation. Being a resident for many years, we went through this with Turning Points, Scotland proposal for a drug rehab in Donald Road, the safety and security of all who frequent Howard Park, mental health issues, suicidal thoughts and addictions gather. I can't stress enough how completely inappropriate the park is for such a venue. I admire the people who are willing to assist people with mental health issues, drug addictions and people with suicidal thoughts, but the proposal to create a facility under the banner of a cafe meeting place in the public park is totally unrealistic. The facility would be ideal for meeting place for drug addicts. I'm right to object to Kilmarnock Railway Station, the Old Man's Heritage for rehabilitation of drug users. So as they set out, the aims were clear in direction of the Railway Heritage Trust, and none of that would have been provided. Consultation meeting at the railway station attracted over 50, and the recorded introduction and the meeting by Craig Fulton and the further Q&A around the cart transfer for OTC. Following the meeting, the attendees were offered a tour of the refurbished station, and they could see for themselves, as it was pointed out, Cabinet, it wasn't fully utilised, but in that occasion, every room could be seen that was used. So going back to the meeting of Cabinet on the 18th, and this is fundamentally what we're here is a call for that decision that was made. Councillor Mackay clearly stated that when we have had experience of asset transfer coming from and moving against the will of the surrounding population is that we have not had success. And she says there that my concerns are in relation to that. My understanding is that there had never been, in that case, any previous transfers approved. None were against the will of the surrounding population, but it might be worth highlighting in this particular application that only 1.4 of the ward objected, and based on misinformation, leaving the silent majority for me, 98.7 with no concerns raised. I asked Councillor Mackay at that meeting, she spoke on behalf of all our group, and she responded by saying, of course we do, Jim, we go forward as a group decisions are taken, and all of this is discussed, and we come to an agreement in terms of what our position is as a group. I would take this morning that any conclusions are drawn, that there is any lack of support or any lack of understanding for mental health issues or any lack of support for what the Railway Trust has done, because that would quite simply be a misinterpretation of what my position was and the group was. We are very clear on all of these issues that have been raised and are aware of the levels of mental health, distress and excellent work that has been undertaken by the Railway Heritage Trust. This issue is quite simply the wrong location, very simple. Thank you. That's the same question to Councillor McFadden, and John had responded. I think I have to point out for my group, I fully understand it, and understanding that John had a stroke and serious mental health issues, and he still has some, but he really appreciates the work done, but he still feels it is the wrong location. It goes on that James Adams has had an awful lot of representation from local residents and are very concerned about what the usage is. We would generally definitely support the cafe, that the whole aspect of the tennis club and reusing the buildings, we really welcome that. But due to the amount of local representations, could not support the councilling side of it. The cafe as a wellbeing place, yes, but the councilling side of it couldn't support it, I'm afraid. From Councillor Douglas, I think that if you'd stated, and I think my point of view, I'm concerned about the location is more about that. A, half the town wouldn't have a clue where it is, and B, if Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust are running it, anybody looking for anything related to the trust are gravitating towards the station. It finishes off with, I think the Old Man's Cabin in Howard Park is not that location. So as I said to you earlier, I can understand why I might be a wee bit confused. When Councillor Mackay said the experience of asset transfer moving against the will, she finished off with saying my concerns are in relation to that. Councillor McFadden states it's in the wrong location and should be somewhere more discreet. And after Councillor Douglas' concerns, it's moreover signposting in the wrong location. I know how important facilities like this are and the value our partners place on mental health issues. I have the pleasure of representing a community-run organisation within my ward in Nether Third, who applied through an asset transfer process for the building for community use. Then over the last couple of years, successfully applied for grant funding to extend the facility to increase within the function hall area and include 2 mental wellbeing counselling rooms set in a location adjacent to a children's play park and at the heart of the community. There were no objections. Wellbeing services are being delivered at Dumfries House, arguably set in one of the most beautiful parks in Scotland. No one bats an eyelid. So the concept is no unique to East Ayrshire, and there is no evidence to suggest that this is not the right location in the Howard Park. And if there is, I have yet to see it. All through the discussions at Cabinet and the asset transfer, at no point was there mention to the fact that the process applied failed to address the concerns of the local community against the asset transfer, introducing unnecessary jeopardy to the success of the project and its harmonious integration into the community. It could be argued that the process we are here for today, in fact, could achieve unnecessary jeopardy to the process of the project and its harmonious integration into the community. The objections based on misinformation and their validity were clearly addressed and presented accurately to the Cabinet by officers with years of experience in the process. Why should it be in question now? Let me make this perfectly clear. Mental health issues and the delivery of facilities that accommodate counselling should never be used as a shuttlecock and a game of badminton used for the sole purpose of opposing for the sake of opposing and political posturing. We all have mental health. Some people might never be affected by poor mental health, but if they do, then they should be able to address their issues without fear of stigmatisation and discrimination. Members within this chamber have experienced mental health issues of their own and know the stigma that it carries. We've had an opportunity to make positive news headlines, to clear a path and brush aside the misinformation and discrimination at Cabinet. But instead, have made the headlines by achieving the exact opposite, by giving credit to the additional time to the small group of individuals perpetrating nonsense. I contacted a national organisation called See Me, who seek to end mental health discrimination, and copied them into the Cabinet paper and the video recording of the meeting for comment on the application from the Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust. They responded as it reads, and it reads as follows. With so many people finding things tough just now, it's great to hear about a new community-based mental health support service being planned in Kilmarnock. While awareness around mental health has improved in recent years, we know that stigma still exists. Misinformation and misunderstanding about mental health and mental health problems can be some of the biggest barriers that people will face when it comes to getting help and support. I think it's important that we remember we all have mental health and face struggles or challenges at any point. So to have a local service that can see more people, give them space and time to talk and provide them with personal support is ideal. I will refer to the media because in an article published in the Daily Record, it reads the local Conservative MSP Brian Whittle backed plans for a wellbeing cafe in Kilmarnock's Howard Park, despite colleagues demanding a review of the decision. Mr Whittle blasted the misinformation campaign that has plagued the proposals, but stopped short of criticising Conservative councillors who have joined Labour members in calling for the Cabinet decision. I thought I would cover a project worthy of note. Ayrshire College students developed an initiative to improve mental health and wellbeing of students and staff in the wider community within Ayrshire in partnership with Chris Boyd Charity. Passing Positivity started as a one-day event aimed to raise awareness of the benefits that physical activity can have in someone's mental health. Since then, free weekly football, dance and multi-sport groups have been made available to the Ayrshire public at Ayrshire College in partnership with the Chris Boyd Charity, KB9 Academy and Vibrant Communities, East Ayrshire Active Schools and Ayrshire Sports Ability. A college-wide charity signal had been produced for Passing Positivity, written by an Ayrshire College music student and recorded by ex-student alongside Britain's Got Talent winner Jai McDowell. This is a quote: "The issue of mental health is of critical importance, and our staff and students are doing what they can to make a difference in their communities." Rightly, this groundbreaking initiative has a lot of publicity, including winning the prestigious International Green Gown Award and being shortlisted for the College Development Network Awards. But the key thing is we keep doing what we're doing and we can make a difference to the people who matter most. That quote was from Councillor James Adams. So finally, as requested as part of the hearing for me, is to respond to the terms of the call-in. And this is my personal view, set out in the call-in notice, is that this is a deliberate smokescreen set out in the call-in notice that masks the stigma, the misinformation, the discrimination, the bias, whether that be unconscious or not, around this application being bought or being sold from a small minority in the vicinity of the park, but being bought by the wider Labour and Conservative groups and bringing this forward today.
Okay, you finished, Councillor McMahon. Thank you very much. Okay,
Any of the officers,
yeah.
Chair?
So any of the officers wishing to come in at this point? No. Okay. So we'll move to stage 4 of the hearing, and that is that members of the committee may then ask questions of the signatories to the call-in notice and or the cabinet members with responsibility for the portfolio and any of the senior officers. So I'm going to start off, if that's all right, and this question is directed to Councillor Mackay. You used the term language, and given what's laid before us in table 1 and table 2, as part of the objections, would you agree with the language that respondents have used, or some respondents have used within their objections regarding this community asset transfer? And obviously the wider background you'll see on the Community Asset Transfer website, where the minutes of the meeting and the objections were noted as a accurate recording of the meeting. Is that correct?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that, and please direct me if I am wrong, I think you're asking me, would I support stigmatising any groups? The answer is absolutely not. Not now, not ever. Is that something that I support? Is it behaviour that I would support and endorse? Definitely not. I have spent the best part of 50 years of my life working with most marginalised groups across our communities. I certainly would go out of my way to be in opposition to anybody who is making any stigmatising comments towards any groups at all. So certainly I would not support that. My premise is, and I have tried very, very clearly here, in both the reason for refusal at Cabinet and also for the wording of the call-in, to be absolutely clear that this is quite simply for me that the groups who have raised concerns, which is a legitimate part of any consultation process, have not had their concerns addressed, have not had their concerns addressed. I have given, again, I will repeat that again. The concerns are raised that this was just a paper exercise as a consultation and that a decision had already been taken. These are not ways that we want to proceed. In terms of stigmatising or being negative in terms of mental health issues, nothing in any of the work that I have undertaken, either within this council or in the years prior to coming into this council, 3.5 decades of work with marginalised groups. I certainly would not support anybody marginalising or stigmatising or being negative about mental health. People having mental health issues for me is the equivalent of people having colds or flu or any other escalating illnesses from that. Certainly not something that I think is negative in any way. It is just quite simply something that happens and can happen at any time to any one of us. Way back, over 50 years, when I first in training encountered the issue of mental health, the statistic even then was that 1 in 4 of us would experience an episode of mental ill health across our lifetime. That's not something that, again, would be something that I would undertake to take any stigma associated with that. It is as likely to happen to me, it is as likely to happen to anyone that I know as anybody else. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Can I ask either Councillor Maitland or Councillor McMahon to confirm what the misinformation was that they referred to and was referred to in the paper? Just to confirm, please, what they believe is the misinformation.
Thank you, Chair. If I can answer that, and I think I read out some of that misinformation in the correspondence read out there about the rehabilitation of ex-prisoners and drug addicts. That was clearly not what this facility was there to treat. It was there to treat, as I said, low to moderate and early interventions with mental health issues.
Councillor Maitland. That's fine, just take your time, it's okay.
Yes, apart from that, there was the misinformation put out that the decision had already been made, that this was a paper exercise, and that was counted, of course, that it had to go through Cabinet and indeed is now going through governance and scrutiny. So there seemed to be a few comments as well that this had already been set up by the council and the charity. So that was further information that was contained within the paper, and that was addressed within the Cabinet paper on the 18th.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any questions they wish to put across to anybody? Okay, Councillor Richardson, then Councillor Cogley.
Can I put a question to Councillor Mackay, please?
Of course you can, yeah.
Councillor Mackay, Maureen, I mean, this morning, always very detailed in council meetings, Maureen, for that. I give you, great credit. But we listened for, a long time at the start of the meeting there about process and what the process hasn't done. But you said, and again, it's been picked up by the chair, you said something during your presentation, language for me is always everything. Now, I've got the script of the initial meeting at Cabinet in front of me. And in a response to Councillor McMahon, you sum up by saying the issue is this. It's quite simply the wrong location. Very simple, thank you. This morning we heard a lot about process, but then in your last submission there to this meeting, you gave all of the reasons why this has got to go ahead, Maureen. 1 in 4 Scots suffer from mental illness. This is for people who are just at the start of experiencing problems, so that they can meet with a proper counsellor in surroundings, a quiet place, where they can have a chat with somebody, and it might just head them off going down a dark road that we don't want them to go down. And when I heard you speak the last time there, not your submission this morning, when I heard you speak the last time there, I really thought, Maureen, what are you doing? Because surely as a council, we're here to offer the people of Kilmarnock a wee bit of guidance and a wee bit of leadership. And at the end of the day, Maureen, this is the right thing to do.
Sorry, Councillor Richardson, it's a question that you are to be asking, not make comment.
So my question is, how come it's changed from your summing up at the original Cabinet meeting to this call-in notice and what we're looking at today? What's changed?
Councillor Mackay.
Councillor Richardson, you might not like what my response is, but it is about process. At Cabinet, there is the opportunity to have the papers and to consider, do you support what the recommendations are, or do you not support what the recommendations are? I read the papers. The papers for me then raised concerns that I have talked about today. There was no requirement at Cabinet for me to elaborate further on that. My view was that the recommendation was not one that I could support, which is exactly why I moved against it, knowing that we had a call-in process, which is what we are undertaking today. One is the backside of the other, the right hand and the left hand of what our process is within this council. So it was very clear and very appropriate for me at Cabinet to express and quite simply say that I couldn't support, and to say that that was because it, again, I want to go back to make sure that I quote, that it was not considered to be an appropriate location. I have the opportunity today to elaborate and to explain, and I have linked that. I have not at all picked up on any elements of either mental well-being. I have not picked up on any elements of outside space in relation to that. Those are not points that I am here to debate. My issue is that because the process failed, we are in the set of circumstances now that, in a way, a location has now, by failure of the process, no longer is able to be considered as an appropriate location because, again, and I'm really sorry if people are not understanding that what I want more than anything, and I've said it, I will say it again today, is for the Trust to be successful, to deliver the services that the Trust wants to deliver for the needs of the community. I want that to happen in a location where it has the greatest possible chance of working. That is quite simply a location whereby it has the support of the local geographic community. Regretfully, because of how this process has been applied, it's like any relationship. Once trust has been broken, it is very difficult to get that trust back again. So what I want is I want success, and I want the local community also to experience a development of trust. That's why I have phrased the terms of the call-in in exactly the way and the approach that I have taken. It's quite simple. I'm sorry if I seem to be failing to express that.
Councillor Mackay, on the back of that, part one of your call-in reason, the presented report and process applied as described fail to address the concerns expressed by the local community against this asset transfer. Please describe what the concerns which were being expressed, what the concerns are and which were being expressed by the local community against the asset transfer.
The local community are quite simply that. They are not people who are experts in process. They can only go with the information that they have access to at any point. Some of the issues that have been presented, that have been highlighted as misrepresentation, have come about because there has been information which has been in the public domain, which people are able to read, which has used language which has talked about things that the local community have seen, then they have seen that information change. That straight away raises in their minds, help, what's actually going on here? Raises in their minds issues like, is this something that has already a decision has been taken about this? Is this just something that's a paper exercise, when what they are seeing is information that they're able to access in the public domain when it is changing? That's part of what I hope I'm describing to you. Would you like me to give you a for example?
Yes, please. I think we need to be pointed in the direction of that information which has been claimed to have been changed.
Okay. Again, part of the process, and again, absolutely correctly, is that the trust would be looking for what is it that we are actually having to do here in terms of this asset itself. Part of the area that they looked for support from and looking for funding for would be the Architectural Heritage Foundation. There was a website, which was the Architectural Heritage Foundation's website, which had information which I understand had been given to them by the Trust itself, saying that the Trust provides critical addiction and mental health services for the Kilmarnock area, and they plan to use the cabin as a meeting space for their programmes as well as other local community groups. That website also talked about the Kilmarnock Station Railway Trust itself, and it talked about what was the trust about. It had a description, and it talked about the trust offering volunteering and training opportunities for people affected by addiction, mental health issues, loneliness, and isolation. Following responses to the consultation, that I understand, and I have copies of it here, was that the information was then changed. It still states correctly, because it is fact and correct, that the Kilmarnock Railway Heritage Trust offers volunteering and training opportunities for people affected by addiction, mental health issues, loneliness and isolation. Correct. I understand when I read that these are two separate things. I cannot expect every member of the community to be able to see these as two separate things. The changes made in the second indicate that the Trust, which has a strong focus on mental well-being, plans to use the cabin as a cafe, toilet and meeting space for delivering counselling services to help people manage stress, anxiety and loneliness. I do not have an explanation as to what the changes are. I know that factually those changes took place. If I was somebody who had concerns in the area about a proposal and I saw that change taking place, it would be a reasonable conclusion for me to say, wait a minute here, I have said and I have expressed what my concerns are, and now I see some documentation actually responding to those and changing what this project was there to do, from what was set out the first time to now what has been set out. That, I am afraid, would support a view, if I had that view, that this was just a paper exercise and that a decision had already been made. I consider that the process, which is our community asset transfer framework, had an opportunity and had a responsibility to be alert and aware to all of these issues that were live within the local community and seek to address those as part of the process. My premise, and again, I go back to the very clear, the very direct wording, was that the process failed to take that opportunity. And as a subsequence of doing that, has put in jeopardy the success of the project by the Trust.
Thank you very much. So it was Councillor Cogley, first of all. Oh, okay, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, firstly, I'm in two parts for coming in just now. Firstly, it's to absolutely robustly defend the process and application of the process that we have for the community asset transfer. It's served us extremely well in East Ayrshire, and I've got absolutely no doubts whatsoever that the application by my officers has followed that process to the letter. I accept that there was an extended period of time acceptable, as there was significant concerns raised by the community, all of which I believe have been addressed by my officers. Furthermore, it's been noted that there had to be further extensive consultation due to it being common good. This is standard practice. What I would like to come on now is in regards to the Architectural Heritage Foundation website that's been referenced this morning. The information contained within the original website, it gave an overview of the project. It indicated that other projects in which the organisation, namely the Kilmarnock Heritage Railway Trust, which they engaged in, including those with a focus on people with addictions and offenders, and indicated that that group would move services to the site, unnamed services. What I would say is that that was during the period of consultation, Chair, and that the Architectural Heritage Trust received 2 contacts in regards to the information contained within the site. And I would also want to allay any fears that my officers weren't aware or alert to the local issues being live. They were on every single turn. As a result of this engagement and engagement through the Architectural Heritage Trust and KSRHT, there was a small tweak made to the website to make it more specific to the services that would be moved to the Howard Park or proposed to be moved to the Howard Park. What I need to be clear on is that apologies, Chair. The tweak was to reduce any perceived confusion on that matter. Namely, when each of these 2 correspondents engaged with the Architectural Heritage Trust, they were referred to our Community Asset Transfer website, which clearly, in detail, confirmed that the services to be provided at this location would be for individuals with low to moderate mental health services. That was never in any doubt at all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Blair. Okay, Councillor Cogley.
Thank you very much. And goodness me, in my years as a councillor, I don't think I've been at a meeting where the language and the emotion, and in particular the emotion, has been quite so heightened. I think we need to try and put the emotion aside and think about the outcome here and what's going to happen at the end of this process. It's critically important that we come to an outcome that is arrived at through correct and proper process. Because as David stated quite clearly at the beginning, if we fail to do so, we could find ourselves in a position where we, as elected members and officers, are acting ultra vires, i.e. not within our legal requirements, and that could be problematic for all of us. So the process is absolutely critical here. My concern in this is in relation to the consultation, and I'm still not clear exactly what the extent of the consultation has been. Now, initially 200 households were consulted, and that was at the early stage in the process, i.e. at stage 2. And 200 households were consulted. There were 241 objections. Now, that is a staggering statistical response as far as objections are concerned. And I would have thought that when we then went on to do the more detailed consultation, that it needed to be extensive leafleting, communication through social media, through a number of public meetings to ensure that every member.
Councillor Cogley.
Hello.
Is there a question at the end of this?
Yes, there
Thank
is,
you.
which I will
Okay.
get to.
Okay.
And I would like to know what the detailed consultation actually consisted of, what was sent out to households, how many households there are, how many households were actually consulted with, because I think that is absolutely fundamental. As I understood it, for any project to be successful, there needs to be in excess of a 30% positive response from the cohort of people, i.e. the ward members who would be affected. So if Blair, you and your team could respond to that, please. Thank you.
So we'll pass that over to Craig Fulton.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth giving quite a detailed chronology of how the consultation process went. Initially, Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust circulated 200 leaflets throughout the locality. The leaflets were made to engage residents to make sure they had a straight line of communication with Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust and engage with them if there was any challenges which they perceived. It's clear that this was not a consultation. This was an engagement, first of all, with the community, because this is a prime site and the organisation thought it would be extremely beneficial to have the community on board with the regeneration of what is a derelict Victorian building. From the original consultation, there were a very few number of objections which came to the council with very little communication to Kilmarnock Station Railway
Sorry,
Heritage
Craig,
Trust.
can I just ask you to clarify the original consultation? So you've jumped from the engagement exercise to an original consultation. I'm just trying to make sure that people are following you here, because I'm a wee bit lost there.
I appreciate that, Chair. Apologies. From the original letter, which the Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust, the 200 letters which were circulated to the community, very little feedback was received. So that was on 27th of January, that circulation was given. The first report of a counter circulation.
Sorry, 27th of January, what year?
2020. The first report of a counter circulation was on the 3rd of March 2020. This was from the Friends of Howard Park, or a gentleman, a resident, sorry, who was pretending to be a friend of the Howard Park. This was calling for a group to be set up. Following on from that first counter circulation, 4 other documents were circulated within the community. Those in themselves brought in particular challenges to both elected members and to senior management, given that individuals objected directly to them. We spent time with those residents trying to assure them that the counter circulations were inaccurate. The counter circulations which indicated that this facility was for those with critical addictions and ex-offenders was not accurate, and refer them back to the original documents which were sent. We took time to allay any fears, communicated with every resident which presented itself to either an elected member, a senior management of the council, or myself in terms of their objections. I appreciate that there was a significant time between the original circulation of the letter, indicating what the project was, to the formal consultation which met Part 8 of the Community Empowerment Act. However, this was due to a number of circumstances, including illness and absence, as well as the coronavirus pandemic. We used throughout that time, throughout all the different counter circulations, which indicated this facility was for those with critical addictions and ex-offenders, we continued to engage with anybody that represented. It was really important throughout. As we know, the community is the main element to any community asset transfer, and engaging with individuals to make sure that they have the right information was key to the success of any community asset transfer. By the formal consultation in September 2021, we had already amassed a number of objections which were held. The formal consultation, which, as indicated, met the specifications in the Community Empowerment Act, went out. All parties who'd represented got the consultation. The consultation was formally put on the building itself. It was put in every entrance to the park to ensure that anybody engaged in the park saw the consultation document, had an opportunity to engage with that consultation process itself. The document was in with news circulations. It went to the community council. We met the guidance as indicated to ensure that people had an opportunity to view the formal consultation and give representation. That was the ultimation of those 241 objections. That document brought those objections, and those objections, as indicated in the Cabinet report, were considered. The accurate objections in terms that, the misinformation was addressed where we possibly could. In terms of the misinformation surrounding the paper trail and already done process, the Cabinet meeting, which decided which presented for Cabinet to approve the project, in itself was evidence that there was not a paper trail. So that consultation process lasted from the 13th of September through to a community consultation meeting on 21st April. So an extended time was given to ensure that we engaged individuals that had any objection whatsoever. That, just given the dates, that was not the only time that we will engage with individuals who have objections. Individuals still request information from East Ayrshire Council in terms of it, and we continue to assure them that the project, as indicated, is the actual project. In terms of the consultation itself, we have done our very, very best to make sure that everybody has had an opportunity to have their say. We have worked really hard to engage with every single resident that's given a objection to either the council, to councillors, or to the community asset transfer team. And we have worked really, really hard to make sure that the right information is there and has therefore been presented to Cabinet.
Thanks, Craig. So I'm on the Community Asset Transfer website just now, and I'm reading from the minute of the meeting of the 21st of April. And there was a question posed to yourself, and it's apparently everyone was supposed to get an email for the consultation. I only found out when I saw a sign in the park. And your response was, I appreciate that you've submitted an email which indicates you did not receive an invitation. As I said, I will investigate and come back to you, which is fair enough. If there is anyone else that feels they have not been notified, then please come and put your contact details down, and I will include that in the investigation. The results of the investigation will be noted on the minute of this meeting. It then goes on, and the investigation result is here, and it's highlighted in red, so it's clearly marked and on the website. An investigation was held into the distribution of the invitation to the meeting. In total, 239 objections were received and 182 invites were sent, which meant that 57 objectors did not receive an invite. The issue was caused as one of the 3 batches of emails did not successfully send. As per the indication at the meeting, this error has been highlighted to strategic leadership in order for them to consider what action is appropriate. So 3 batches of emails did not successfully send. So you could argue, is that human error or is that an IT issue? So can you just elaborate on 3 batches of emails which did not successfully send, and what part, who put that part of the process in place?
Thank you, Chair. So the objectors were batched into 3 different emails as indicated. 2 of those emails sent, 1 email did not send. I am absolutely responsible for that email that did not send. I hold my hands up to say that I have made an error. I put that on the document. I referred myself to my strategic manager to indicate the same, as the most important element of this process is to make sure that everybody has had an opportunity to state their case. And while there was notices in the park to encourage people to engage in the consultation, I do accept that there was one email that, for some reason, I could not get on the cryo server when I investigated. That is accurate.
Okay. Now, within the paper, and there's a lot being said about misinformation this morning, and it's referred back to the Architectural Heritage Foundation. I think it's maybe there. Now, the misinformation which is being stated, which was from the website, states what the aims and objectives are of the trust, which I don't think anybody in this room would object to, absolutely not. But the information you used, Blair used the word tweaked. And when I see the difference in text and the original text, which the community saw and believed that to be the purpose of the asset transfer. So what was originally on the website reads, the trust which provides critical addiction and mental health services for the Kilmarnock area plan to use the cabin as a meeting space for their programmes as well as other local communities. And it states that their programmes are for training opportunities and volunteering opportunities for people affected by addiction, mental health issues, loneliness and isolation, as well as providing rehabilitation opportunities for ex-offenders. So that is what was on that website. So that is the wording that was on that website, which I understand now to be, which we are calling misinformation. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the information contained within the website was correct at that time, and it was changed as a result of the further engagement between the two services. So this was an independent group, the Architectural Heritage Trust, that posted that on their own website and was further corrected by the Kilmarnock Heritage Trust. Thank you.
Thank you. So is it really misinformation rather than?
I think the point that's been made, Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, is, if I understand it right, the applicant body had its own website and they had the initial statement on there. I think that's what you've confirmed, Blair. And the initial statement had that broader reference, and you've clarified that what they started with was a statement of here's what we do generally. So I think the Chair's point is, where did the notion that the actual proposed use of the cabin would involve ex-offenders come from? Is it something that residents or objectors plucked out of thin air? And it would seem the answer may be it was something that initially was sourced from the applicant's own website. Now, there's no judgment being made there. We're trying to establish the facts. But if the fact is that the notion that it would cater for ex-offenders came from their website, which I understand, as you've clarified, in response to the concerns, they clarified and amended it to say specifically this proposal will include this and won't include that, or by definition, will exclude that by not referencing it. So the question is, as a council, looking at that, saying, well, that was on the Trust website. Folk have read that on the Trust website if they've gone there. The Trust started the early engagement before we got to any council process in terms of the CAP process. And therefore, if folk legitimately read something that the applicant themselves have put out that says, this could include prisoners because it was a general rather than a specific, then I suppose the question is are we still comfortable that we're labelling that as misinformation when the source seems to have been the applicant website themselves, if that's factually correct? Is that?
David, yeah, absolutely delighted that you've managed to round that off in exactly how I wanted it to be spoken, but couldn't find the exact words, so thanks for that.
David, yes, you're correct. However, I would be pointing out that we've got no control over that website and the publications contained within the website. And further, as I said earlier, as part of the proceedings, is that all references back from Architectural Heritage Scotland or otherwise was back to the Council's CAT website, which clearly articulated from the very beginning and has been consistent throughout that it would not be for those matters that has raised such concern. Thank you, Chair.
So, yeah, sorry. Thanks, Blair. And from that response, I then want to ask you, so if you're now saying it's not misinformation, it's been portrayed as misinformation in the paper, okay? And if it's, and you don't have any control, I absolutely accept that. You don't have any control over any other groups, you know, what they're putting on their website. However, at that point when we were trying to work with the community and tell them that that is actually not what the use of the cabin was going to be, I think the term misinformation was a barrier in itself to community responding to what you were then trying to tell them what actually was going to be the use of the cabin. So the whole point is the community objections and there's misinformation, and the wording, the misinformation is all throughout the paper. And that misinformation that we are saying is misinformation is information that was directly accessed by the community to the Architectural Heritage Fund website. And it was that wording. So they've read something, they've seen that that's what it was. I mean, so how can, I'm asking, how can that then be misinformation? And then how can that then come to councillors as misinformation on a paper that we are now saying actually it's not misinformation?
I think before, no, just to be absolutely fair, I don't think the point has been conceded and it's yet to be addressed, but I don't think the point has been conceded that it doesn't legitimately fall to be described as misinformation for one key point, Chair, which is, as you've identified, the information around ex-offenders, the notion of them was on that website, but that was then corrected. And the question then is, if it was corrected and folk were pointed to alternative information, which was more specific to the proposal, both on the amended trust website, so there's the correct position, and on the council's website, then if people, having had that further clarification on both those sources, it was that, now it's that, and it's also clearly from the day one on the CAT website being more tailored, no offenders, then the question is it legitimate or not? And it's for the committee to determine, is it legitimate or not, that if people still press the view, well, you said that, you can change your mind if you like, but I'm holding you to what you said originally, even though it's been clarified by both parties subsequently, and therefore there's alternative information, then the question for the committee is it or is it not misinformation to continue to adhere to something that everyone else, the source themselves, have corrected? So I think that's one of the nub of the matters for this committee, whether or not they are satisfied that the council's handling of this, and whether or not it was legitimate to continue to deal with that as misinformation, regardless of where it was drawn from, because once it was identified as a concern, it was addressed by both website and CAT website, and therefore for people in the knowledge that those parties have changed their position or amended their position to still quote the original position may, in the view of individuals, still be legitimately categorised as misinformation because I'm choosing to go with what suits my position and continue to argue something, even though it has been clarified by different parties, including the source of that information, that in fact it's not that, it's this. So I think there's still a question of the legitimacy of any party continuing to pursue an objection based on accurate or inaccurate information, and wherever they drew it from, once the accurate information has been provided, if people continue to prefer an alternative version, then anyone in this room can determine for themselves whether or not they think that counts as misinformation or not. The report that went to Cabinet and the report that's here needs to be read in the round by the members of this committee before they take any decision.
You wanted to come in, Blair?
Thank you, Chair. David's articulated it extremely well in terms of how we arrived at this position. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cannon.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm still struggling a little bit to understand the reasons for the call-in, because it's been said a number of times that it's around the process. My understanding of the CAP process is that the CAP process is designed to determine whether this is the correct location or the wrong location. So if there's a flawed process, then we don't know whether it was the right location or the wrong. If I'm making no determination of whether the process was correct, because that's obviously the reason why we're here. But if the process was flawed, as is given the reason for the calling, then to me, we don't know whether it's the right location or the wrong location if it was flawed. But Councillor Mackay has said, and I'll get to the question in a second, the reason the Cabinet for taking it to government scrutiny was the issue is quite simply the wrong location. Very simple. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but a couple of times this morning you've also said it's not the appropriate location. So perhaps you could let us know how you've reached that conclusion when you're saying it seems to contradict that if we've got the wrong process that can't reach the conclusion, how you have then drawn the conclusion that it's the wrong location. Because if the process that you think you want, you don't know what conclusion that would have reached if it followed the conclusion that you seem to think that was the correct conclusion. So I'm still trying to understand the reasons for the calling on that basis. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll try. Thank you. I'll try very hard, and thank you for your question, Councillor Canning. Taking you back again to what's in the minute of Cabinet, on the basis it was not considered to be an appropriate location. Okay. The presented report and process applied as described failed to address the concerns expressed by the local community. I keep coming back to that because for me that is absolutely fundamental. There is something flawed about this formal consultation process. I don't fully understand what it is, but for people to resist when new information is put in front of them, that new information is there, it can be, in my opinion, only due to the fact that trust, which is critical in any successful relationship, has been broken. And that is that the people, regardless of what has been said to them, are continuing on the view of just a paper exercise, decision has already been taken. That means for me that the process itself has failed. It doesn't mean to say that we haven't gone from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. It means that our consultation and our engagement with the local community has failed. Officer made reference to the fact that the Community Council had been consulted. My understanding is that the Community Council hadn't been consulted, that again, the description in relation to Councillor Cogley's question of how had the consultation actually, the formal consultation, taken place. It was that, again, that notices were put in the park, that there was a notice put on the building itself, that community groups had not been directly consulted, that there had been, in the sense of how we normally understand formal consultation, that had not taken place. Again, for me, that is a weakness in the process.
So can I have confirmation that Grange Howard Community Council were indeed consulted?
Through the statutory planning notices, the Howard Park consultation paper went to Grange Community Council, and I'll provide the email that confirms.
Yeah, if you could do that, thanks, Craig. That would be great. Okay, Councillor Mackay, you want to come back in?
Come back. There is a difference within planning from statutory consultation and a notice being sent out and them actually responding. I think for me, the question is, did they actually formally respond to a formal consultation process? I've seen that in planning many times when a statutory consultee has been consulted and no response has been received.
So, Chair, through you, I think if we could get clarification, if I know Craig said statutory planning process, I'm not cited that there has been any planning application for this. So if Craig could maybe, I think he's agreeing, if Craig could maybe clarify before we go down
Sorry, and my mistake.
Yeah,
I was just referencing
you're right.
Process, not that there has been a planning application.
Through you, Chair, it would be helpful if Craig could clarify exactly what was the consultation, what was sent to them, because I think we would want to be clear whether it was anything to do with a planning process or this process. Statutory planning process is governed by the planning legislation. The CAP process is entirely governed by our own policy and procedure document, because it's the CAP process that was applied, not any community empowerment statutory process. So I think before we start comparing different processes, we need to know that that's a legitimate comparison. So if we can maybe just have clarity from Craig on exactly what was sent and the status of what was sent to the Community Council.
Through you, Chair. Through the Part 8 of the Community Empowerment Act, in terms of the disposal of common good land, it indicates that the Community Council should be made aware of any proposals. The proposal was sent, therefore, to the Community Council.
To clarify, Chair and members, as you've heard there, it's not a planning application that's been relied on or a consultation with the Community Council on a planning application. It was a further round of consultation connected directly to this, because as members are aware from the discussion today, even if the decision taken by Cabinet survives this process and any further consideration by Cabinet, the Council still requires to petition the Sheriff Court for permission to actually allow this to happen. And therefore, to allow that, then in tandem, the common good consultation is what Craig's referring to, and the Community Council have therefore been consulted as part of this process, not any separate planning process.
Okay, folks, I have a list. Okay, so we're going to go with Councillor Lennox, then Councillor Hogg, Councillor Richardson, and then Councillor Cogley.
Thank you, Chair. One of the reasons given for the call-in is that it failed to address the concerns expressed by the local community. My question to Councillor Mackay would be if she can tell us specifically what concerns have not been addressed by the community, because my reading of the Cabinet paper, the concerns that were raised, fairly broad concerns, and some specific concerns were addressed in that Cabinet paper. So I'd like to hear some specific examples of concerns that have not been addressed, please.
Certainly, and I'll go back and I have said it again, and I will certainly stick with that. And that was the concerns there that the facility that it was just a paper exercise and that the decision on the community asset transfer had already been. When I look at table 1 and I see again what is actually within that, when I see again what is actually in table 2, I do not see that those specific concerns have been addressed. I cannot see that, Councillor Lennox. If I could, I wouldn't keep making the point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, the decision-making process for CAT transfers would be that decision is made in this chamber by Cabinet. The decision is not made by officers, and indeed it's recommendations that's presented, and it's up for members to make the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Okay, Councillor Hogg. Councillor Hogg.
Sorry about that. Good morning. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Now, obviously, this CAT transfer, when we're in the NHS and seeing all these huge waiting lists and people trying to access mental health well-being at ground level is so important. Now, James Adams earlier said that the process, the timeline was of issue to him as a newly elected member, as am I. James, if that timeline was different, would your opinion have changed as to this CAT transfer? Secondly, I would like to ask a question to Hayley, our internal audit officer, and could you advise that audit applied to this process? Are you satisfied that the process was followed, and what audit was used in this, please? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Adams, just to respond.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. My point was really that the process had been flawed. The time frame, along with the consultation that has been mentioned. Again, I don't know if you want to go over the consultation again, but it was in elements that have been responded to by our officers suggesting that they are comfortable with the process. I was uncomfortable with the process, and that is still my interpretation.
Hayley, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members and colleagues. My oversight of this exercise was based on my knowledge of the CAP framework, which I developed with colleagues in the Council some years ago. My oversight is about the mechanics, not the merit of the application. So I interviewed the two main officers, the team coordinator and the head of housing and communities, and had access to the evidence around the process. So my conclusions were that the paper to Cabinet had identified the completeness of concerns expressed, and there was the opportunity at Cabinet for if there were any gaps in that process, for that to be identified through the governance process at Cabinet. And secondly, I listened to that Cabinet meeting, listened to the concerns that were raised, and noted the mitigation with regards to the concern around the users of the potential facility, which would be mitigated by the management of the terms and conditions for the lease for that property. So it was about completeness of concerns reflected in the Cabinet report, the opportunity at Cabinet for any other concerns to be raised, which perhaps had been omitted, but there were no additional concerns identified that I had noted, and mitigation put in place for a very specific concern with regards to a risk of the application scope being widened at some point in the future. So I hope, Councillor, that answers your question.
Thanks, Hayley. So are you satisfied that due process has been followed?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Hayley, could I just ask in relation to the respondents to the original consultation and the 57 people who were not notified of the community consultation. Are you able to comment on that and how that then comes into the process, consultation process?
In terms, obviously, I didn't walk through this process with the service, and I was only involved laterally in looking at the evidence available. But as I noted a few minutes ago, the opportunity was at Cabinet for any gaps in those concerns from the community to be articulated. But from the evidence and my review of I think it refers to 241 representations in the Cabinet paper. There were in fact 239 in the CAT website, because there was 2 duplications that were taken out during the process, but didn't impact. So in terms of those 239, I looked at that in a lot of detail with the officers and agreed with the themes that had been summarised from those 239 representations. And if my review of the process was the whole point of the Cabinet process and that part of the governance process is to identify if there's any other facts of the matter that need to be raised.
Thanks, Hayley.
Councillor McFadden, I think, is looking in this matter, Chair.
Councillor McFadden?
Through you, Chair, is it a point of order, Councillor McFadden, or are you just indicating you'd also like to ask a question? We have, I think, still Councillors Richardson and Councillor Cogley ahead of you in that queue, but if it's obviously a point of order on what you've just heard or been said, then the Chair would bring you in sooner. Is that a question or a point of order, Councillor McFadden?
I think it's a bit of both, but I'll wait my turn. I'm quite happy to wait my turn.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McFadden. It's Councillor Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, it's just returning to the issue of the use of the term misinformation, and it's just really for to get this straight in my head. So we've got a website that mentions ex-offenders. That's then corrected, and the council's own website has the correct information on it that ex-offenders aren't part of this. But I think the misinformation, there's obviously, I think there's 3 other groups, external groups, who are issuing information to householders in the vicinity. And one of them, the Friends of Howard Park, their first communication goes out and it just says that the aim would be to secure, their aim would be to secure a sustainable future for the park and its buildings. No issue with that. I'm comfortable with that. But then this external group, the Friends of Howard Park, they then issue, I think it's their second circulation, that states, we understand that rehabilitating prisoners is also one of the target groups. So then they're bringing in what I would term misinformation, but it would only be misinformation, I think. Were they relying on that in their second circulation after the original website had been corrected? And that's a question to Blair, sorry.
Through you, Chair, yes, I can confirm that despite it being reflected on the website from the beginning and the change to the Architectural Heritage website, that proceeded to be consistent with the remainder of the circulation. So it took place.
I am absolutely happy that we can, and you mentioned yourself, Chair, that the word misinformation throughout these papers. On that basis, I'm 100% happy with that, because what I think you've got here are...
Richardson, sorry to stop you, but we are still at the question stage, and the discussion stage comes at stage 7. So if there's not another question followed,
I'm fine.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Right, I'm fine, David.
Councillor Cogley?
Yes, thank you. And I was asking earlier about the process and the consultation process, and I don't think that my question was sort of fully answered. Craig, first of all, I would actually like to commend you on your honesty in coming forward in relation to getting some of the stuff wrong. And I think that the way that you've expressed that is absolutely commendable. As far as the consultation is concerned, and we've spoken about the Community Council, Did anybody attend at the Community Council and present what was going to be taking place? Was the Community Council invited to respond either as an objector or in support? And if so, what was said? And do we have notes of any discussions? And I'm still at a loss as to why we haven't included every household. Having had such a huge response to the initial consultation, the initial brief consultation, I'm still amazed that we didn't do some far deeper and further consultation and leafleting and knocking on doors, because we knew that this was so contentious. And so I would like you to respond to that, please.
Through you, Chair. I am unaware if the Community Council were in attendance at the consultation meeting. They didn't make themselves aware if there was members. In terms of the element of a more detailed consultation after the objections were received, given that the Friends of Howard Park and the other circulations were given throughout the Ward 4, throughout the Howard Park area and got to the Moorfield estate, we had collated those objections as indicated for people that were concerned about the proposal, given whether that was the information that they received from the circulations or in fact the actual consultation document itself. So we made sure that any party that had a vested interest that had declared themselves to the council as having an objection received that consultation. Given that the vast majority of residents who received the consultation didn't make a formal objection, then we followed the principles as indicated in Part 8 of the Community Empowerment Act in terms of the disposal of common good land to make sure we followed that process diligently. So the vested interests were those that made the objections previously. They all received the consultation document and recirculated as indicated through the Empowerment Act.
Come back in there.
Yes, thank you. So we didn't go out and speak to the Community Council?
To you, Chair. Formally, no, we didn't actually go out to the Community Council. We made them aware of the project.
And we didn't go out and speak to the silent majority?
In terms of any any consultation, we hear the objections at a far greater rate than we would ever hear support for the organisations. When discussing with senior colleagues within planning, they indicate a similar stance whenever a planning application comes up, that they receive objections and in a very rare cases they receive support. This was a very similar process. We received 239 representations, as our Chief Auditor indicated, and only 6% of those were positive and supportive of the project, which would be in line with what our colleagues in planning normally get.
Do we not need to get a 30% support rate for something like this? No. No.
David, do you have any information?
No, I'm not sure. Apologies to Councillor Cogley. I'm not sure the provenance of that, but if colleagues are all shaking their heads in the negative, so the 30% pass rate or support rate isn't recognised, Councillor Cogley, sorry.
Do we need to get a 30% response rate? Maybe I've got that wrong. Do we need to get a 30% response rate?
Colleagues can answer if I get this one wrong, but as I said earlier, the CAP process is the council's own process, and I'm not sure that there's any threshold built in terms of percentage levels of support. It's, as you hear, the CAT group meets, assesses, considers the emerging recommendation, but as Blair rightly pointed out, the process is always clearly centred around the final decision being taken by Cabinet, subject clearly, as we know today, Colin.
Okay, Councillor McFadden.
Yes, I've got two questions, if that's okay. First one is for clarification, please. So my understanding is that the first information that went out on the Architectural Heritage website, contained the facts that, people with addiction would be catered for and bits and pieces, and then that people that, round about draw all sorts of conclusions for that, rightly or wrongly. But that was then corrected because that information was then removed from the council's website and the Architectural Heritage website, and the mention of addiction was removed. Is that correct? And there was no further mention of it after that. Is that correct?
Not quite, Councillor McFadden, and again, officers will clarify if I summarise this in error, but my understanding, the position that we've established is that the applicant trust initially put a statement on their website. That statement was reflective of their overall aims and activities. In effect, in my own words, it covered everything they do. That included reference, I think, to ex-offenders. And then the point was taken, does that mean there'll be ex-offenders involved in this proposed use in the Howard Park? And when that point was made, my understanding is the applicant trust amended their website rather than removed. They replaced that statement with a tailored statement that made clear, if that was a generality, here's the specifics of what the activity will be in these facilities. At that point of amendment, the trust website then aligns with the council website, which always had from the application form in the outset that the activities proposed if the transfer was approved were a subset or lesser than the full extent of all the activities they undertake in all of their premises. So the nub of the information, this isn't about who made it up, it's about where did it come from, and what we've established is that anybody who was praying in aid, it's about ex-offenders, could legitimately say, when asked, where did you get that? Well, I didn't just make it up, I got it from the applicant trust website. That's not been disputed and everyone's accepting that. However, when the trust realised that folk were taking that and wrongly concluding that the actual proposed use of the park and the facility in the park would include ex-offenders, the trust amended it, not hid it, not revised it, they amended it to reflect the reality which aligned with the application form they'd put in and the more limited statement of activities that would be carried out under the proposed development. So the question really, as I said earlier, for this cabinet is, if it was drawn from that source in that context that's been explained, then at that point, anyone can legitimately point to it and say, well, that's what they're saying themselves. The question for the committee come stage 7 will be, if it was subsequently clarified and corrected that's not the case, there will not be ex-offenders involved in these activities, then the question is, if I am told that as an objector and I choose to ignore that and continue to point to the old information and say it's about ex-offenders and perhaps go round and tell my neighbours it's about ex-offenders or encourage other folk to sign a petition saying it's about ex-offenders after I've been told that's not the case, the question for the committee is, does that still constitute misinformation regardless of where it was drawn from? And having posed the question, it's not one I would propose to answer. That's, as I say, for the committee.
Thank you. Can I continue? Would that be okay?
Can I just come in for a second, please, Councillor McFadden, to David? Yeah. David, my understanding is the text was not placed on the Trust's website. The Trust made an application, a funding application to Architectural Heritage Fund, and that was then lodged on what the purpose of the funding was for on that website. And it was the cabin, and it was the use of the cabin would be leased by the local authority for these. That is, and it was on the funders website.
Apologies, I think there's too many trusts here, broken or otherwise, but I've used them interchangeably then, so I think you're right, and if Blair's confirmed that, you're correct. It was their submission to another trust website that initially had the broader statement of what it would be about. But quite clearly, the application that's been submitted and assessed and processed was for the reduced level of activity, not including the offenders. So the question remains in terms, and it was your own question earlier, the legitimacy of badging those objections as misinformation when they drew on information that might have seemed to come from a legitimate source. It's about the timing, because it was corrected, but the objections then weren't corrected in line with the original information. I think that's the point. Apologies, Chair.
Thanks, Dave. Councillor Mackay, is it a point of order?
It is a point of order, just for absolute clarification. There are two sets of documents, one that I'll call an original and one that I'll call new, which say, and they both say, this is critical, they both say, the Trust offers volunteering and training opportunities for people affected by addiction, mental health issues, loneliness and isolation, as well as providing rehabilitation opportunities for ex-offenders. They both say that, and that is absolutely accurate, because at that point on the website, it is talking quite simply about what is the Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust about. When we look at the old men's cabin, okay, the original states, adapted use, the trust which provides critical addiction and mental health services for the Kilmarnock area plan to use the cabin as a meeting space for their programmes as well as other local community groups. The new statement said, the Trust, which has a strong focus on mental well-being, plans to use the cabin as a cafe, toilet and meeting space for delivering council services to help people manage stress, anxiety and loneliness. That's the point of differentiation, not, David, the point that you made. The point that you referred to remain exactly the same across both documents. And I think it's really important that we have clarification on that.
Thanks.
I would just.
Okay, officers, can that, sorry, Councillor McFadden, a wee minute, please. Blair, can you confirm that, please?
Thank you, Chair. The information referred to in terms of the updated version, which I believe is October 2020, would confirm that it's about the Kilmarnock Station Railway Trust, which confirms details round about rehabilitation, addiction, mental health issues, etc. Chair, I need to again strongly make the point that the core information and indeed the principal site which would hold all access to information about the CAT transfer was the Council's CAT website, which retained the accurate and consistent information throughout.
So my question then would be, how was that change in information managed?
That's my question.
Thanks, Councillor Mackay. Sorry, McFadden. So how did the council then manage that complete change of text? How was the community then? Was there a process whereby that had to be communicated to the community?
Chair, I did cover this slightly earlier in proceedings, but I can confirm that there were two representations made to the architectural heritage, and they then therefore made contact with the Railway Trust, who then corrected the information. That was the process that was followed to enable the change to the website.
Was there any involvement with the community in the change of that information to make them aware? Was there any working with the community to say, listen, what's there isn't the case, what's now there is the case? Before, as I understand, community saw one piece of information, and then after a certain period of time whereby objections were building up, the information was then changed.
I'm unable to speak on behalf of any of those organisations, but again, just to make very clear on the point that any contact, or whether positive or negative, because there has been positives in this application too, is that it was all directed to the CAT website, Chair.
You're absolutely right to point out that there has been support for this application. You're absolutely right to point that out. Councillor Nick Pageant, do you want to come back in?
Yes, please. Quite a bit of my questions have been answered, so thank you for the clarification, David. Yes, the information went out saying one thing, and then the information was corrected and went out saying something else. My question was it corrected by removing the reference to addiction and ex-offenders only, or was it, as it should have been given human nature, corrected by saying that we made a mistake, this is incorrect, and this is the only things we're going to be doing here? Because with human nature, when you offer somebody something like free tires or free window washers or whatever you're doing, or free something at the shopping centre, but then you change it and you remove it, loads and loads of people come looking for the free thing that has been removed because they only remember what they saw first. So was the correction simply removing of something that wasn't correct, or was there any clarification that there'd been a mistake in what was on the website, and it was made very plain to people that it was a mistake and they're correcting a mistake? Or was it simply just they removed what people had seen? Because people don't forget what they see. They just think it's the same document, just with that set of wording not in it. But that doesn't mean to them that the first one was incorrect unless you stipulate in the second one that we made a mistake, that it was incorrect. So was there any stipulation in the second documents and the second stuff that went out on the website that categorically said they made a mistake with the first one?
To you, Chair. I think with thanks to Councillor Mackay, Councillor McFadden, Councillor Mackay read out earlier both the original statement on the Funding Trust website as submitted by the Applying Trust, and what was read out was the generality of what they do in the round, including the activities for ex-offenders, and then a statement as well about the Hubbard Park that didn't really differentiate. And then what Councillor Mackay clarified moments ago was that when, and as Blair confirmed, when folk made representation to the Funding Trust saying, what's that all about? The Funding Trust raised it with the Applying Trust, and the Applying Trust then amended the statement. And from what Councillor Mackay read out, I think we all believe the case is that the first part of the original statement remained, the general statement by the Applying Trust that we do all of these things in general was retained, and what was amended was the specific second statement that the development in the park will be about these activities with no reference to the ex-offenders. So what they retained was the first part on both, and what they clarified when it comes to the Hubbard Park, it's not that, it's this, I believe is the case, and that's what's been confirmed. That was all happening on the Funding Trust website, while over here on the Council's CAT website, the original submission by the Applying Trust to the Council correctly stated from day one the more limited activities proposed in the Hubbard Park Old People's Cabin, and therefore there was no correction required on the Council website because that was always the accurate statement. So I don't think anyone can give further clarification, because I think that's a reasonable representation of what Councillor Mackay actually read out in the chamber.
No, thank you. That's fine with me. I mean, basically, I believe we should have, well, I'll leave it till later. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Canning.
Thanks. I think some weight was given to the objections that there was a paper exercise, but was any evidence provided for that accusation? Because it seemed difficult to investigate something if there wasn't any evidence provided and it was just a spurious, comment, which I guess wouldn't be the first time it's made against a council doing something.
Through you, Chair. Apologies, Councillor Canning. Can I ask you to reframe the question for me, please?
I think, through you, Councillor Canning, I think the point that's been made illustrates the difficulty in trying to prove the negative. People were making representations that they believed, in their opinion, whether reasonably held or not, that this was a done deal, that the decision was taken. And I think the question is, was anyone in a position to offer any evidence in support of their view that this was a done deal, that it was a paper exercise? Was any detail put on those concerns that officers could have reasonably addressed? I think that's a fair summation of the question. Thanks, Councillor Canning.
Thanks.
We've got Councillor Hogg, then Councillor Maben. I beg your pardon. So,
Thank you. So, any representation which we received which indicated that this was a paper trail was directed to the community asset transfer process, indicated that the application was still in consultation stage, that was being developed by the Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust and would be brought before Cabinet for elected members to decide. That was a very consistent message with regard to any communication in terms of the idea that it was a paper exercise.
So as we know, there wasn't any evidence given by the objector. Yeah, thanks.
okay, Councillor Hogg, then Councillor Maben.
Aye, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I hope so. I think we've been demonstrated now that audit has been adhered to, showed that due process was there. Information has clearly been available to the public through the East Ayrshire Council system. But I don't know what was raised at community councils, because obviously I'm not Kilmarnock based. So my question would be to fellow councillors, did you attend these community council meetings, and what type of objections were raised at these meetings, and did you bring them to the table to be discussed, etc.? And lastly, I'm going to go back to James Adams again. James, I apologise for this, but I just want clarity. In relation to your timeline, if the timelines themselves have been changed in this process, do you agree that the cabin is an appropriate use, therefore, for a CAT transfer? Thank you.
Okay, so I can answer your first part of your question, and indeed the second part that was directed towards me. I haven't missed any Grange Howard Community Council meetings. I have not missed any school meetings. And I have always put my apologies in and sent a councillor's report for the Residents Association meetings. So to be clear, Grange Howard Community Council, when I raised it at their most recent meeting, the chair said that he, in terms of misinformation, was asked only about the provision of a coffee shop and meeting rooms. There was no inference of counselling. Most of the members who were there in that evening were not aware of anything at all to do with the old man's cabin, which would point to Councillor Cogley's issue about consultation. In terms of the clarification of that, I contacted the chair yesterday to say, did he have it documented? Is there any minute of it? But no, he didn't do that. But he said he was quite clear that the only correspondence he received from the council was in relation to change of use from the old man's cabin to a coffee shop and meeting rooms. No content other than just meeting rooms. I can clarify, Grange Parent Teacher Association, Annan Hill Early Years, Gargison Early Years and Primary School have not been consulted. Annan Hill Parent Teacher Association had not been consulted, and the residents group of the Newton area had not been consulted. So in terms of the consultation, while I appreciate there seems to be satisfaction with the process, but the people that I have spoken to are unaware of the plans. Sorry, could you go with your second point? I think it was, if the timescale was different, would I think it was an appropriate use? If that is the case, it's not necessarily my decision. I would take forward the views of the constituents that vote me in and indeed vote me out, and I would take their points.
Thanks, Councillor Adams. We'll bring in Councillor Maben.
Sorry, I wasn't finished.
Sorry, Councillor Hogg, I thought you were.
Thank you. So can I just ask, I'm a bit confused then, if the audit has shown that due process and information has been available for 2 years on public domains, is our issue therefore the process or the actual building? And I'd
Who's that question to?
Yes, I would direct that to Maureen Mackay, if that's possible, please.
Thanks, Councillor Hogg.
The issue, Councillor Hogg, is again very clear. I'm going back to the terms of the call-in. The call-in is the prescribed report and process applied as described failed to address the concerns expressed by the local community against this asset transfer. And again, in terms of my concerns are that makes having failed to do that, and again, we've heard from Councillor Adams about what the lack of consultation actually was. Councillor Cogley has already made the point that if there had been sufficient early community concern, why wasn't a more extensive consultation done? I think that's exactly a point that I would have made. Why not? We haven't had an answer to that, and we are still left then with what I have spoken about for almost 3 hours now, and that is therefore the breakdown of trust and the lack of acceptance of the validity of this project, the validity of this proposal from the local community, because the process has failed to answer the legitimate concerns raised by the local community.
So therefore, I come back to the validity that you talk about, and we've heard that this information's been available now in the public domain for 2 years. I've only heard from one Kilmarnock councillor who said he's been to Community Council and has had some people raise concerns. I asked if these were brought forward to be consulted with when you were doing due process nomination down at Cabinet. I've also not been quite clear, as in you talk about the validity of the project, but the validity of the project is not what we're discussing. We're discussing the process. Now, this information has been available for 2 years to the public, and Blair has been quite clear that this has been on public domain. Therefore, my question remains as in why you question the validity of this project.
Councillor Hogg, I need to go back to you and say all of the information has not been available to the public for a 2-year period. The consultation meeting, which has been talked about, took place on the 21st of April. To give you a further, just one moment, I do want to get this absolutely accurately when I quote this to you. A request for that meeting. The meeting itself had complaints raised that the meeting, everyone who had made an objection, 1, had not been informed of the public meeting. 2, that the meeting room was small. A third comment was that not everybody who was at the meeting seeking to object could adequately hear from the meeting itself. All of this is documented within the minute of the meeting. The minute of the meeting runs to some 10 pages. Again, there were requests made for copies of the minute of that meeting which took place. That was made, I understand, I'm again struggling just to see the exact date. I understand that request was made 5 days after the meeting took place. It took a further 2 months before the minute of the meeting was actually made to somebody who was present at the meeting itself. For me, Councillor Hogg, that is not the level of process that we as elected members have experienced and are routinely experiencing across the majority of East Ayrshire. it is about coming back to, I do think that the concerns raised are legitimate concerns, and I am giving you and trying to give you example after example of why I think that there has been failure with this process.
Thank you very much. The concerns seem to be based on the misinformation, if I'm not wrong. Could I ask Blair, Blair, in relation to this CTAC transfer, is it any different to any other transfer that East Ayrshire Council has undertaken? And if so, why would we treat it differently?
Through your chair, slightly different, given that it is on common good land. And that it's in regards to a building would be the differentials in this application. That would be in direct response to your question. Thanks.
And in relation to our public engagement, has there been any difference to previous CTAC transfers?
Through your chair, again, due to the nature of it being on the common good land, it has been extended. While I accept the 57 people who may not have been invited to the meeting, or who were not invited to the meeting rather, still had the opportunity for a period of 6 months to engage in the consultation. The attendance at the meeting did not inhibit any of their views or comments being recorded as part of this application. Thank you.
And did all community councils that were approached, did they put forward any objections or any other complaints?
Through you, Chair, yes, I'm in receipt of emails which would confirm that local residents engaged via email with the Chair of the Community Council, raising their views, which were subsequently forwarded to Council officers. Thank you.
So in all, it has been a robust process up to this point.
I would absolutely support that. Thanks.
Thank you.
On the back of Councillor Hogg's point, Blair, in terms of engagement, would it be normal process to advise or invite ward members to those meetings?
Chair, through you, in terms of ward members, certainly there was a lot of information shared with ward members about those public meetings. There was also briefings with board members around about the CAT application and process, as well as some of the information that was in the public domain and the direction of travel of the CAT transfer framework has in place that we were taking forward as we would do with similar applications. So members, particularly ward members, were notified at various different stages through the process and were fully, I'm led to believe, aware of the events that were taking place.
Can I ask, within the minutes on our community asset transfer website, Ward 4 is mentioned. I'm a Ward 3 councillor. The asset is in Ward 3. I was not advised of any meeting on the 21st of April, which I'm disappointed about. And I would be interested to find out whether my ward colleagues were, but I don't think they were.
Chair, if there's a typo error in the minutes, and I apologise. I appreciate it as a Ward 3. In terms of inviting elected members to community consultation meetings, the purpose of the community consultation is to hear objections from individuals, to take those objections and allow the Kilmarnock Station Railway Heritage Trust on this occasion to counter those objections and have that recorded. Those are then made available for everybody to view and considered by the Community Asset Transfer Panel as part of the community benefit. No board members are individually invited to the community consultations, given that the objectives of the community consultation is just to hear views and have them understood and countered by the organisation themselves.
Okay, then I would just simply say that maybe going forward, that's something that we have to look at.
noted, and we'll do that.
Chair, I think equally, and the point's been made by colleagues earlier, that the process overall has to recognise and provide for the fact that it is elected members that take the decision at the end of the day. And as you know, in the particular case, 2 of the ward members sat on cabinet. There's yourself and there's Councillor Adams are the 4 members. So I think it's fine with the benefit of hindsight for and the committee can make any recommendations it wishes. But equally, as the officers have spelled out, the process reflects the fact that elected members, if they are being asked to attend that consultation, may find themselves limited in how they could participate effectively, because some of them at least would have been anticipated to be involved in the decision. So it's just context to the process in terms of it's the process that we've always applied on 60 odd occasions.
Thanks, David. Okay, so Councillor Maben and then Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you. I've got a few of over 60 community asset transfers to the officers. How far back is that going?
The original transformation strategy with the community asset transfer framework was 2013.
So we've over 60 CAT transfers from 2013. How many of those have been called in by governance and scrutiny?
Through you, Chair, this is the first.
How many of the other previous asset transfers have had substantial opposition and objections for the public? And by substantial, I'm thinking 200 objections.
In terms of objections to community asset transfers, it is very varied depending on the site and the consultation. So there is a varied amount of objections to any asset transfer.
Are there any, to the best of your memory, of this scale with 200 plus objections that you can remember?
There has never been a community asset transfer within the council with this amount of objections.
Thank you. I noticed on table 1 in the papers, we have only 6% support for the additional facilities in the park and 88% objecting from the respondents. As part of that, in your opinion, do you think the loss of support with the public and the broken trust with the members of the public has been partly influenced by this website, which was then altered and perhaps raised suspicions that something was going on? In your opinion, and I would open that to Claire Maitland and Murray Mackay as well for their responses.
Could you repeat that, please, Peter? Thanks.
I'm trying to remember what I said now. In your opinion, given the 88% objections, as part of those objections, do you believe that the website being altered or amended or corrected and the suspicions raised from that alteration is part of the reason why we seem to have lost the support of the public and broken that trust that we need for a successful CAT?
The amount of objections themselves, well, the objections were sought as well. So that might be one of the reasons there were so many objections. Just to answer that one, there's 17,000 residents in that ward. I'm one of them. And as I said in the previous one, nobody asked myself and my neighbours, but perhaps they weren't campaigning for me. I think the amount of objections is subjective to the actual objections themselves. I have no problem again with the process. I think the changes in the website, people make changes to website all the time as new information comes up. I think the information that was on the website was used to help the campaign for the people that were objecting in the first place, and I think that spread the misinformation to some extent, but I believe it was addressed within the process, and I believe that was put in the cabinet papers. If there's any more questions that I've missed there, I'm quite happy to have another go.
And same question to the officers and Councillor Murray Mackay, who brought up about the website being changed. Is this part of why we have lost support of the public?
Through you, Chair, the role of officers would be to make recommendations rather than opinions to members, and I'd be consistent with that approach. We believe that we've provided a very balanced report, setting out clearly the recommendations that we believe in following our processes was the correct process and procedure. Thank you.
Councillor Mackay, are you going to respond to Councillor Maben?
Thank you. I'm very sad that we're here. I think that we did not need to be here in relation to this asset transfer. So in summary, Councillor Maben, yes, I think that trust has been broken with the local community because of how we have approached this matter.
Councillor Maben, you've finished.
Yep, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Oops. Okay, Councillor Maitland want to come in. Sorry.
It was, I think I missed this out in response, so please indulge me here. I don't believe we have lost support of the public. I think we lost support of a certain percentage of the public, but I don't believe we have lost support of the public. I'd just like to add that. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to try and get this drawn up. I know that we're still wanting questions from Councillor Watts and Councillor Richardson, so if there's anybody else want to ask more questions, can you indicate just now as best you can? Okay, and thinking about a comfort break as well, so once the questions are wrapped up. All right, is that okay with members? Yep, thanks for your patience, thanks. So Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hearing everything that's being said, and the good question here that who was responsible for the consultation process? Was it us as a council or the Kilmarnock Railway Trust? Because the consultation that's come in looking at the papers has only actually had a response back from 1.4% of the residents of the ward, and only 0.5% from the residents of Kilmarnock as a whole. So from within the ward, only 98.6% of the residents from that ward haven't responded to any form of consultation. So that's either they didn't know that a consultation was going on, or they just didn't respond to the consultation. So there may be a major issue with the consultation process. So who is responsible for actually dealing with the consultation process within the procedure?
Just to clarify, in order to hopefully expedite matters, as colleagues have contributed throughout the day, the process followed is the council's approved CAT process. And it's on the website, policy procedure, there's a model lease. So I think the document runs to about 180 pages. So the process that's undertaken is undertaken by the council. What you've also heard today is running in tandem or parallel with the council's consultation under the CAT process. There were other websites. There was the Funding Trust website on which other information was contained that people have also had regard to. And the point has been made as that was running separately. That was a separate process by which the applicant trust are trying to get money out the funding trust, and therefore other information was accessible in other processes and in other places. But the actual CAT consultation as conducted is carried out by the council through the client service and has been carried out as you've heard in the manner described.
You want to come back in, Councillor Watts?
No, that's fine. That's just the point that, you know, that we've had respondents of 1.4% when there's 98.6% of that ward really hasn't shown any form of either objection or support. But yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Richardson, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll be brief, everybody, because I know we've been here a long time. It's actually a question to Councillor Adams, to James. This morning, James, we've spoke a lot about the process and we've got really immersed into it. And a lot of that, the issues we've discussed have been, have we lost the confidence of the local populace? What was on different websites at different times? I just think one of the points I'd like to make is that to James is that we're in the age of the World Wide Web. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It can be Scottish independence, it can be the board at your local football club or the running your football club well, and it can also be something that's happening at your local council. On all of those issues, there'll be multiple websites that the members of the public can go on to their own laptop at home and source information from different websites that are giving them different bits of stuff. And I actually think everything's no East Ayrshire Council. It's whether James agrees with this or not. There's also an actual duty of care on behalf of each of the individual members of the public out there to actually find out about things, take information from different sources. But the main point I'd like to make is to James is that the council website always had the actual specifications of what we're actually looking to do here. So at the end of the day, if I'm a member of the public and I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that, I'm seeing this, I then go to East Ayrshire Council and there it is in black and white for me. And who should I believe? So would James agree with that? The second thing is, the three Tory councillors seem to be getting in, so deep into what's the process, it's the process, it's the process. Their own local MSP, Mr. Brian Whittle, hopefully has done what I've just described there at home. And I read a superb, and bearing in mind, this is probably the one time in 5 years that I'm going to be here that I'm going to praise a Tory. But hopefully Mr. Brian Whittle, member of the Scottish Parliament, has sat at home, seen all of these different bits of information, and then he went out into the public with a superb article and he backed this 100%. So fair play to Brian Whittle. So my last question to James is, have the three local Tory councillors sat down with Brian and discussed this? And why is Brian so positive about it?
I'll answer your second question because I understood that one. We have sat down with Brian and Brian highlighted his support and I highlighted the fact that there had been limited consultation and significant flaws with the process. Brian was unaware of that and he took comfort from the fact, and I think it was mentioned earlier that Brian stopped short of coming out in public. I think it was Jim that mentioned that, because Brian, from his perspective, understood. I think he'd spoken to the Railway Heritage Trust, as have I. I have spoken to the residents. I'm not aware of how many residents Brian has spoken to. I can't answer for Brian. But Brian is supportive, and myself, and I can only speak for myself, I can't speak for Neil and John, but having spoken to the residents, I have concerns over the process, and I appreciate people here today are saying that the process has been followed, but 98.6% of the people haven't shown any response to the process. 57 people who highlighted an objection but weren't invited to a meeting subsequently, and the lack of consultation with the schools and community councils puts doubt in my mind. And indeed, the leader of your own group and the leader of the council highlights the fact that the consultation leaves a lot to be desired. That was enough for me. Thank you.
So I have a question, and it's regarding what the recommendations were from the Cabinet paper. So members, the papers in front of you, which were the recommendations, and it's point 3, that vibrant communities continue to facilitate communication between Kilmarnock Station, Railway Heritage Trust and local residents to encourage understanding of the proposal and to ensure residents are kept updated on the progression of the project. Now, given that it's common good and that what we're hearing is people who were not consulted, who local community groups who are affiliated to that area, etc. And that 98% of the ward, because we've been talking about very much about the ward and the membership of the ward. So 98% of the ward was not consulted on this proposal. So given that that's the case, and given the lack of trust of those 88% who did respond to the consultation, do you think that that is possible and achievable? And I would simply just refer that to Blair if possible.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of responses to any consultation, you can't guarantee what your result to what may be the case. So you can absolutely try your best, as officers have, to consult on matters. The response rate will fluctuate between different matters, whether it be a CAT transfer, a rent increase, a council budget. So I wouldn't be able to give any guarantees. They're all variable. Thank you.
So my question was, point 3, do you think vibrant communities being able to facilitate communication between the Heritage Trust and the local community, do you think that that's achievable?
Point of order, I think we're reading the wrong recommendations. Could you give us a page number, please, Chair?
It's at page 50. Oh, I beg your pardon.
The original paper to Cabinet is at page 6 on the 18th of January. The recommendation there is at 2, Roman numeral 2, and it's, as you say, to continue to facilitate communication. So page 6, para 2, Roman numeral 2.
Well, apologies, Councillor Maitland, I've got different papers.
Chair, thank you. The opportunity to engage with the consultation is available online. If it was the determination and recommendation as instructed by members, that we would then take that action accordingly.
Point is community response to it. You know, if they're going to respond to it, given the feeling in that local community about how what they believe is their concern, and that regardless of what we've discussed in here, their concern is the original information is what they believe to be the proposal for that cabin. Do you believe that further communication is going to change that? Therefore, part 2 of Councillor Mackay's, if I'm getting this right, Councillor Mackay, if I'm getting it wrong, please step in. So that then would chime or would go with part 2, introducing unnecessary jeopardy to the success of the project and its harmonious integration into the local community. Do you think that would assist in harmonious integration with the community? But to do that, you've got to get community backing.
I'm really sorry, Chair. I'm losing you in terms of the question.
I think that the first, again, always happy to be corrected. I think what you initially put was when the paper went to Cabinet with the original recommendations, one of them was that Cabinet, over and above being asked to approve the lease and, well, the other one's the tennis club, Cabinet were asked to approve vibrant community